And that's really what they're talking about now with Mark Carney is bringing in this green economy, which will be taxed to the hilt. I mean, that's the whole idea of having us in the smart cities, and being able to measure every human action, and that will have a price. Be it, I don't know, cooking something or opening your fridge too much or drying your hair with a hairdryer, whatever human action you take will have a price. And that's what they will do. They'll tag it to that. Unfortunately.
If there could be an offset, I'm planting a garden, could there be an offset for that too? Or they, well, you're growing your own food, that needs to be taxed now.
Well, yes, yeah. They'll find a way of taxing everything if we comply to this.
So good afternoon, everyone. Today, such a timely discussion here with Sandi Adams. Now, Sandi and myself, Piers Corbin, and Mark Windows, we spoke down in Glastonbury, and what's interesting is it was a full moon and Halloween in Glastonbury, and then tonight is another full moon. And also, Sandi's really been delving into Agenda 21, now renamed Agenda 2030 for the last at least 10 years. Full expert on the knowledge here. And you can find more information. I'm going to make sure I have the site right here. sandiadams.uk. Now, again, how overlapping is this, where the site that she's been putting up information for such an enormous amount of time, really getting into it about environment, agriculture, farming, cashless society, carbon change, taxes, depopulation event, the re-education or the retraining of the populace, social engineering, and also privatization. And that's what we're seeing across the world's central banks is privatization, where American Treasury is now owning everything across the board. They're buying it. BlackRock's facilitating the transfer going on. Are there super lines of cars to get tested? Are there people inside there? And what seems to be routinely shown again and again is nothing.
Nothing.
We're getting played. Like they played us when they took us off the gold standard and never-ending printing.
Absolutely. I mean, Bretton Woods, 1944 to 71, we had a boom economy. You know, we all did. We had when it was tagged to the gold standard, it was that the Bretton Woods system worked, and then it was actually the US that unilaterally took us off. Who was that? I don't know. It was in 1971.
That was Nixon.
It was Nixon. That's who it was. And things went drastically wrong after that. You know, that's when the austerity started, and it hasn't stopped. You know, then we had the 80s, and in Britain we had the Thatcher years. Austerity just got worse and worse. And, you know, we've now, and the EU then happened as well. And again, that was that was a plan to destroy Europe. And, you know, we've been living with this, and it doesn't matter who's in power, whether it's Republican, Democrat, Labour, Conservative, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who it is. It just is, it's a shadow government pulling the strings from behind. So, and the party politics is just there to divide us.
And I'm also wondering if the reset of valuation in fiat is going to be based on a new gold standard, because if you take a look at holdings around the planet, there seem to be a couple huge dogs out there with most of the gold reserves. So looking in Asia with China, they could start their own gold-backed currency just on the amount of gold that they're holding.
Really?
And, if they are going to do something, it's going to have to be a universal base trade unit. So special drawing rights, I don't know how long that's going to keep us going through, because that's a basket of currencies. But if they're all flailing and not matching for parity for any buy-sell, then what's going to happen? So a basket of junk is still going to be a basket of junk. Like it might be an intermediary step for these SDRs, but it's got to come to something that's universally recognized as tradable value. So, is it going to be part crypto? Sure. Is it going to be part gold-backed currency, silver-backed currency, metals-backed? Sure. But then, this is where it comes back, and you hit it on the head there a while back, was what about our forests? What about our land? What about the mineral rights? What about the earth itself being used as a part of value that can be issued on currencies with what countries have in terms of natural resources? And then that would be something totally different. That would be a natural resource-backed currency.
Well, there's the countryside, as we know. I mean, there was there's this whole project called the Wildlands project, which is about rewilding, vast swathes. This is all in part of Agenda 2030. So that people are all in the smart cities, and then in the rural areas, you have a restricted movement for people. They're not allowed into the rural areas, and it's only there for federal and military and government use. And there was a conference, actually, the Wild 11 conference, which, I mean, really, it was ironic. It was cancelled because of the coronavirus, but it was being held in Jaipur in it was the 23rd of March. It was supposed to be held, 23rd to the 28th, I think, in Jaipur. And it was actually a leadership conference by the UN and the Wildlands. It was called Wild 11. It was the Wildlands project from the UN to bring a leadership to rewild 50% of the planet. So if you rewild 50% of the planet, where do the people go? They go into the smart cities. And the whole thing is to use all those resources. So it would be the globalists who would actually have dominion over the resources of the countryside. And that's what that conference was all about. And I don't know how they they obviously will hold a conference somewhere else, or maybe they'll just get together on Zoom and do it. I don't know. But that conference was cancelled. But I found that quite shocking, that there was a conference to rewild 50% of the planet.
Well, see, right there, that I think is a false narrative, because if you've ever been on an airplane and you've flown across vast swaths of this planet, it's over 50% wild already. So maybe the rewilding is 50% of urban habitation or where people currently live, because when I've been on a fair few airplanes, I'm going to say way more than half the world's wild still. And a 50% number to rewild it, well, it's already done. Mission accomplished. Leave us alone,
Yeah, exactly. But I think, if they do Bill Gates is behind all this population stuff. I mean, let's face it. He even came up with that equation. Did you see his equation?
Unfortunately, yes. One of these has to go to zero.
And he said, if we do a really good job with healthcare, reproductive health, we can actually reduce that by 1.3 billion. And you think, did I hear him right? Did he say with we can reduce the population? And with reproductive health care, and with this and with that, and healthcare itself. I mean, it's not healthcare; it's genocide. So this man is insane. Along with Elon Musk, he's clinically insane. And the other night we saw, because we have very clear skies.
Did you see the satellites moving overhead?
We saw them go across the Skylink. Is it Skylink it's called, or StarLink?
Yeah, because my friends out in Colorado said they saw it. But here's the thing. They gave them a shelter in-house. You can't even peek out your window for the same exact time that hundreds of them went over. And then after that, it was a weird minute, like 9:17, the lock-in starts. And then 47, you're allowed out of your house. Right at that same time.
We weren't supposed to see that happen.
Hundreds of them.
Yeah, absolutely. It was like a train it looked like a train of UFOs going across the sky. And I got phone calls saying, go outside, look at this. What is it? Is it UFOs? Is it planes? What's going on? And it was only when, you go into it and you think, oh yeah, it's Elon Musk. He's putting all the satellites up. This is far more advanced than we thought. I'm absolutely sure, because a lot of people say to me, yeah, but they wouldn't do that because they haven't got the technology. The technology is way beyond what we really know to be true. And that whole Starlink is all about the satellites and the 5G and being able to implement all the AI that they've got ready, and the smart cities. And I think what do we do now? I don't know. What do we do?
There's so few of them that we have to understand that we have the power that they don't. It's only taken a few thousand people to lock down 66 million in your country, 300 million in my country. It's a couple thousand people. Like if 100 million people stood up and said, no, I'm going outside. I am not sick. I'm going to. Once the people understand the power that they have, they're being manipulated, social engineered, retrained.
Yeah.
then the power comes back to us, not them.
No,
So few of them, because you talk about the big ones like Gates, Musk, these kind of guys, and that's it. And I think the UPS is at the door here. Do you give me a second so I can sign for a package? Now, let me explain why I ran off there to do this. The amount of crime of people following in cars or the UPS and the FedEx trucks is unbelievable. We live in I wouldn't say a super small neighborhood, but we're way outside the city, and we got neighbors around, but 4 of them have had stuff stolen off their porches or off their front stoops there in the last week. 4 different ones. So there's gangs of cars following the trucks, and then like that guy just left out there, and a car would have pulled up right in the driveway. Person would have hopped out, grabbed the box, thrown it, the car would have took off. But then there's other cars behind it, and this seems to be what's going on with the crime wave here with
opportunists. Well, it can only get worse when people get desperate, when they get hungry. I hate to think what will happen. We've got only a few weeks, really. I mean, I think maybe another couple of weeks before. Certainly, I know that there's people in my town who have no money now. And things are going to get nasty because the government have promised all this money. I've applied for these government grants, which they say they're going to give to businesses, because I run a business, and they have this thing called furloughding, where you pay your staff until the money comes from the government. Well, I can only do that for a finite amount of time, and things are getting bad. I think my company will definitely go down. Most companies, 5% of companies in England have gone down already, and it's going to become more. And I think that things will get desperate. People will start stealing and getting out on the street, and they'll be desperate. We've got big, problems to get over unless we unite and actually say no to this, because at the moment it's all compliance and guilt,
Yes.
and the coronavirus bill, which I'm sure you've seen, is the one in the UK is it takes away 800 years of democratic freedom and rights. Yeah,
because what's happening here is they're asking the dairy farmers to dump out the milk because the demand's gone from schools, universities, these kind of larger institutional buyers. So what they're finding is the milk factories, at least in some parts of the country, are completely full, and they're just, there's a bunch of excess there, and they're like, well, we can't even get it on a truck to send it somewhere, so just dump it out. But then in other parts of, watching truck drivers talk to each other, and there's a fair few videos of people on Patreon who drive trucks that are giving some more real information on the road. But some areas have no milk. So for one part to say, dump all the milk out, and there's still a need for it in other places. I see with the food supply, that's my whole thing with this Grand Solar Minimum about the food. So at some point, the supply is not going to meet the demand, or the demand, there won't be the transportation system to get it there to the demand points, even though there's excess in some other places. And the labor shortage is coming out of California. It's a major vegetable growing area in the States, because the imports have stopped from Mexico. So we're not getting the fruits and the vegetables from South America and Mexico that we normally get. That's kind of stopped for now. So they're relying more on the American homegrown veggies, if you will, and nuts and produce. But that's mainly in California. But there's a huge labor shortage there, so they're having even problem getting it out of the field into boxes to get it onward. So now it's coming again back to the food. The food. How many times can you say it's about the food? You control the food, and then what happens?
I heard the other day that the trouble is that the packaging companies haven't been functioning, and there's food rotting in Europe. Because we import massive amounts of food from Europe. And I heard from a source the other day that the food is rotting in warehouses because there's nothing to package it into, and they can't get it into the supermarkets because there's nobody to pack it, there's nobody to create the packaging. And so there is going to be a big problem very soon. I think we're all being lulled into this thing of, these supermarkets are still open, you can go shopping. I'm noticing the shelves emptying now. There's certain things you cannot access. And I think if this goes on, if this nonsense, this lunacy goes on for longer, this is what will happen, that we'll have nothing in the supermarkets. And then people will be desperate, because not only will they have not money, they won't have food. Yeah.
Yeah, so I wonder why they don't, shift the packaging requirements or just, do something as an interim, because you keep hearing all these, oh, we need to do an emergency measure. Okay, we need to change things on a dime law-wise or whatever wise it would be. So why wouldn't it be the same thing for packaging? Okay, instead of having it in a paper box, why don't we just throw it in a plastic bag and still get it out to market regardless of? Or how about the old way? Like you have things bulk and it goes onto a shelf or in a bin bulk style with no packaging. And you come in and you pick up a head of lettuce. It doesn't have to be individually wrapped or packed, but how about, 50 heads of lettuce together or 50 heads of cabbage? It's like it used to be. Ever been to wet markets and traditional Asian markets? Everything's just lumped together. You got to pick it out yourself and package it yourself. Exactly. I don't know why they're not doing that. It makes no sense.
Yeah, but I mean, I did, before all this kicked off, I did get a document that was given out by a lawyer for the Soil Association, who had drawn up this document for the future of farming. It was actually for the Agricultural Committee in the UK, and it was quite interesting because they were talking about creating mega farms, getting rid of small farmers in the UK, and creating these mega farms which would have a lot of AI input. And this was the whole idea of the future of farming. And what really, really hit home to me, because there's this big push for veganism and and getting rid of the dairy and the meat industry, and I'm sure that's happening in the States, was they were talking about creating insect biomass. So this is this replacement protein, they call it, and that for me was a kind of unbelievable concept, that they would get rid of small farms, and they're encouraging the small farmers in the UK to rewild their farms and become land managers and not farm dairy or animals of any kind.
Yeah, because we drove by a couple of those areas in the countryside there they were asking the farmers to put in the solar panels out there, and we saw those larger solar farms that were, you said it was retooled or reconverted pasture land that they put out, those giant solar farms out there. So you can just see it again and again. You could probably get option A, you can rewild it for a certain price, or option B, you can turn it into a solar.
You can have a wind farm
and then take a stipend off of that on the electricity production every month.
But as we know, renewables don't. I mean, if you look at a pie chart of the whole of the national grid, renewables are a tiny sliver of the energy available. And actually, what happens is the rest of the things like nuclear and coal and gas, that all really is built up. It builds up the rest of the grid. And what we don't realise is that if we're going to go down this whole new Green Deal route, solar and wind and wave or whatever idea they've got for the renewables will not work, because it's not enough to sustain the grid. And we went to Mark and Piers went to I think it was the energy conference in London, Department of Energy, and they spoke to some people there and who were saying, look, if these renewables are great, but they are so basic, and when the sun doesn't shine, the solar panels, and England's like that, when the wind doesn't blow, the turbines don't go round, and when the sun doesn't shine, the panels don't work. And actually, even when we've got all the other energy input into the grid, as well as the renewables, when people at peak time in the winter, when people are all coming home in the evening, switching their kettles on, putting their ovens on, we actually have to turn on underground diesel generators to back up the grid. So if we're going to go along with this new Green Deal and have just renewables, is it going to impoverish everyone? Are we going to go back to being cold and having no lights on for certain amounts of the day? I don't, this just won't work. It just won't work.
Yeah, they're trying to take a step forward, something called CAES. It's compressed air energy storage. And they usually use vast underground cavern systems made out of limestone generally, that they can seal up, and they use shotcrete, and they really get this thing in to be able to hold an enormous amount of pressure. And what they do during the day, like you're talking about there, they'll at off-peak times, they'll run the generators and push a bunch of air down in there like a scuba tank, if you will. And then in these off-grid hours, what they'll do is open it, and the pressure will release and spin turbines, So it's kind of an on and off, on and off, on and off thing, depending on the peak usage in a country. So,
But
I
there
mean, is
may
that
be
going to
new
be counting in as
technologies, yeah.
renewables slash, but these whole wind turbines too, they're killing an enormous amount of birds. And if we need the pollinators for our crops, and how
Yeah.
many hundreds of thousands of birds got killed. And I saw a report like 800 bald eagles in America were killed last year by the wind turbines. And those are
Yeah.
federally protected species. And I just wonder, where's this going to collide with, protectionism of wildlife, which they tout to the highest nth degree, yet the solutions they put in are one of the main causes of a death of a lot of the wildlife they're trying to protect. So it's like, say one thing on this side and do another on the other side. I just don't know where it's going to lead to, except control of your electrical consumption for sure.
Well, that's it, and carbon taxing, and the whole control, the carbon-based economy, which Zbigniew Brzezinski announced in 1971, funnily enough, that he would bring back the carbon-based economy, which was always talked about in the technocracy movement of the 1930s. And that didn't actually come to fruition. The war happened. They wanted to get away. They'd had a depression in the 30s. They were fed up with their politicians. They didn't want a price-based economy. They wanted some sort of trade-off. And they thought about, it was the technocracy movement. It all started off, I think it was the Columbia University. I can't remember the guy's name now, but anyway, they thought up this whole new economy. It was a mixture of social politicians and technocrats, basically. And they thought, oh, let's put it together. And it was shelved because the Second World War happened. And then Zbigniew Brzezinski said, I will bring in the new economic order. And it was basically about a green economy. And that's really what they're talking about now with Mark Carney is bringing in this green economy, which will be taxed to the hilt. I mean, that's the whole idea of having us in the smart cities, and being able to measure every human action, and that will have a price. Be it, I don't know, cooking something or opening your fridge too much or drying your hair with a hairdryer, whatever human action you take will have a price. And that's what they will do. They'll tag it to that. Unfortunately.
If there could be an offset, I'm planting a garden, could there be an offset for that too? Or well, you're growing your own food, that needs to be taxed now.
Well, yes, yeah. They'll find a way of taxing everything if we comply to this. And we're, humanity's at this kind of cliff edge at the moment. And people are saying, oh, we've got the what do they call them? The Alliance are going to help us, or the beings from outer space are going to come, and it's all going to be all right. Jesus will come down, and nobody's going to save us. We're on this. Humanity's on this edge. And if we don't, this is our spiritual challenge right now. If we don't do something and stand up to this tyranny, then we might as well lay down and die, I'm afraid. And that's a horrible thing to say.
And I'm wondering when people are going to notice, okay, so that satellite network that you're talking about, StarLink, there's 2,400 satellites up there now, but they have permission to launch 24,000 in total. So something 10 times greater. And if people are already seeing interference in the skies, radio telescope operators are noticing interference in signals. Just regular astronomers are noticing some strange wave interference inside. So at 1/10 of what they're doing, there's already noticeable, you're watching the satellites at night scream by. Those guys out in Colorado saw just hundreds of them going by in formation already up there in a certain geocentric orbit. So I'm wondering when it reaches 24,000 and then they'll be like, oh, wait, we need more. We need 56,000 now. At what point do people say, whoa, hold on a second here. Yeah. You're putting up an entire satellite network to cover the entire planet in a grid to run this whole, internet of things. Well, what about the signal frequency that affects us as humans in the electromagnetic spectrum?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is that we are electromagnetic creatures, and this is having a devastating effect on our health, and our mental health as well. And there comes a time when you realize that this could all be used to control our minds. And we know that there's a technology that certainly the Chinese and probably Elon Musk, I don't know, are developing to merge man with machine. And so you know, we've got this whole AI agenda just sitting there in the wings, and you say, well, what's going to happen to the rest of humanity? Well, they don't actually need us. If I really want to be brutal, and it hurts me to say that, I look at my 2 little grandchildren, 4 and 6 months, and I don't know what future they've got.
Yeah, because when you look at it in such a wider spectrum, you know,
Yeah.
500 million is the numbers they're looking for. And you can start to see the redundancy play right now. So this whole, what's considered critical infrastructure, is just nothing more than a bean counting of what's essential infrastructure, what's not, what can be cut the fat, you know, at the side there. Just like any company would go in and start chopping off unneeded
It's
arms
a
of
business. It's a
business.
business plan. It is a business plan. And these are hard-nosed people who don't really have any human feelings, I believe. It's a psychopathic agenda. And you know, I listened to David Icke yesterday.
Did you see that yesterday video? That was one of the most riveting, unbelievably motivating, wow moments of video history I've ever seen on the internet, ever. Hour 2 forward, it talks some of the same exact thing. It's about the complicity, the compliance. When you say no, it stops. Same with Extinction Rebellion. Everybody said no more Extinction Rebellion. Within 2 days, you never heard from them again.
Well, that's it.
Was the same thing.
That's it. I mean, they got rumbled, and I think honestly, George Soros and all the globalists, and they thought that they could actually get this pushed through, this agenda pushed through, with Greta telling everybody off, saying how awful we've been, what dreadful human beings that we are, and that we should stop flying and stop driving, and an XR as well. And everybody just in the end had enough of her and XR, because they could see through the lies. But unfortunately, they've brought this in to really bring it in and fast track it. And this is what they wanted to achieve. So you can only assume that this is manipulated, and it is, because it's fulfilling all those things all those agendas that they wanted to bring in. Because there's still a majority of people that don't get all this, and including a lot of my family. My children don't get it at all, and they think I'm a bit bonkers, if to be fair. And I just they're beginning to think there's something wrong, because things will go on, and things will get worse, and they'll see. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge for people, because there's a cognitive dissonance, because so many people say, well, why would they do that to us? Well, if you've studied it for 10 years and you know the people behind it, it's very difficult to say to people, look, the government, the United Nations and the governments do not have our best interests at heart. And that's a really difficult thing to swallow.